I'm Ashok. I'm a professor of philosophy and chair of philosophy at Haverford College, founded by the Quakers. It's one of the top colleges in the country outside of Philadelphia, and I've been there for 40 years teaching philosophy, arriving there as a logician, teaching logic and ontology, the science of reality, but then going to India for the first time after 3 years and discovering a whole new world of philosophy that was in my heritage, but I hadn't been there since I grew up in the West. Born in Trinidad, living in Jamaica, coming to New York as a boy, getting my doctorate at Brandeis University. And so in 1968 I came to Haverford College, and I've been there ever since, trying to pioneer the area of what I'd call global philosophy, opening up a global lens and a global mind for our time in the 21st century, living in a global age, where it's time really to bring our worlds together. And when I arrived at Haverford 40 years ago as a young philosopher, I realized we didn't know how to cross worlds. How do I go, if I'm raised in the Judeo-Christian world, to go into the Hindu mind, or the mind of the Confucian thinking, or the Chinese mind of Lao Tzu, or African ways of thought, or indigenous ways of thinking, such as the world of the Lakota? We didn't know our way. And yet I knew instinctively that was a key to our future. And after 40 years, we've arrived at that point in the 21st century. The Global Dialogue Institute was founded about 15 years ago, and it came out of years of research because I realized that we needed to have institutions that focus the attention of educators, civic leaders, religious leaders, diplomats, youth across the planet on the importance of having basic literacy and skills in understanding their different worldviews and to gain knowledge of how to understand crossing worlds. So if we're in the Judeo-Christian world and culture, what would it mean to enter the Hindu mind or the Buddhist way of thinking and so forth? So the global dialogue, those words are very important. Global here means across worlds, across worldviews, religions, traditions, disciplines, ideologies, different mental ecologies. How can we cross them? How do we recognize them? And can we really have dialogue across worlds? So the Institute, the Global Dialogue Institute, through my work, developed what we call deep dialogue to distinguish what ordinarily people call dialogue. Because when we say we're in dialogue and say, I'm a Christian speaking to a Muslim, but I'm interpreting them through my lens as a Christian, and we think we're talking, so it's dialogue, that's not dialogue. Dialogue requires not monologue, is when we interpret the other through our lens. And we don't realize that's a kind of violence. Because the other person is speaking from a different worldview, a different reality. And if I'm interpreting them through my lens, I'm violating their otherness. So the basic ethos of dialogue is requiring us to become aware that I have a lens, or a complex lens. Most of us have many worldviews. We don't even realize we're living in multiple worlds, and I've not yet been able to even dialogue within myself across those worlds. So global dialogue is really recognizing that across worlds and worldviews. That's the word global. I know global means many things right now, global economy and a global village, but really from the philosophical point of view that of our institute, global means bringing and recognizing different worldviews. And we're in a global village, and America is a global culture in the sense of multicultural. We're a multicultural society, and those are worldviews. So global dialogue is bringing to the radar, to front and center, how is it possible? Is it possible to cross worldviews and communicate truly and deeply across worlds? And so my institute, Global Dialogue Institute, has really developed into a fine point what we call deep dialogue, which requires each participant to realize, let me check out my lens, and to realize that if I simply interpret the other through my lens, uncritically, I could be violating them. So how do I step back from my lens, dilate my mind and heart a bit to open space to move into the world of the other, to see it from their point of view? And if we can do that, there's a dilation of my consciousness, which I call opening the global mind, the global lens, in which now I begin to become more capacitated to see alternative worlds at one moment. When that happens, I'm in a deeper place. I'm in a deeper process. I'm entering the global world. And that's what our institute is attempting, to help people across the planet gain skills and literacy in global dialogue. It's no surprising that someone like David Bohm, who's a frontier physicist, is looking into the implicate order and understanding the unified field, where Buddhists, for example, know in global wisdom that if reality is a unified field, then everything is interconnected and dynamic. Once you got that, then dialogue follows. So Bohm dialogue is a natural follow-through of this insight that reality is a dynamic, interconnected field, because it implies dialogue immediately. So there are many forms of dialogue, by the way, and what I call deep dialogue is a generic name for the many different art forms that are out there in the marketplace. Appreciative inquiry, what Scott Peck does in Seattle in terms of his form of dialogue is another form. What Peter Senge does and the Bohm people do coming out. They're all sensitive to the fact that at the very core, real dialogue requires a sensitivity to knowing the other has a different worldview and to crossing into that. So what typically happens in naive situations when people come together, they interject their agendas. They bring in their own local lens without knowing it, because they've not been cultivated in the ethos, the ethics of dialogue, which is to watch yourself, be aware and mindful of what you're importing to the round table, to the sacred space, and not to uncritically thrust it upon others, right? But so when that happens, which it always does, it is in the silent ethos of the art form of dialogue, by whatever name you call it. And Bohm is one of the great examples, and the people who follow him, is to be sensitive to that open space, opening sacred space. And when people would interject their ego agendas, there are delicate ways of helping them to become aware of it and to check it and then correct for it. Because you really want you want dialogue to speak to where people are. If someone is a fundamentalist, a terrorist, whatever it may be, however extreme, what you would like in the therapy of deep dialogue is to help get it on the table, open it out, and then deal with it. So it's not necessarily a bad thing when that happens. Dialogue is an art form like Zen, like jazz, is a good example, where you can't predict it, you dare not, because you can't control it. Because open sacred space, opening space, and my college, for example, was founded by the Quakers. And Quakers were onto this in Quaker meeting when they said, throw out all of the ideology, throw out all the icons, strip the walls down, people come together, there's no priest mediating between you and God, there's that of God in every person. Let's get together in a sacred space, sit in the silence, and allow the voice of silence to speak. That's the Quaker way. That's where I've been teaching at Haverford College for the last 40 years. That's an example of an art form of deep dialogue. So really what you want to do is to open that sacred space. Very difficult. There was a crisis at Haverford College too, because when I arrived there 40 years ago, it was a small, all-male, white college, 400 students. And they had 15 African-American students they were trying to bring into the culture in the post-bac program. But these young people were feeling alienated on the campus, despite its Quaker heritage. And you know, the Quakers were innovators and pioneers in the underground movement into Philadelphia, for example. So they were known for being not racist, the opposite. And yet, in Haverford College, in its all-whiteness and not having diversity, it never learned the skills of dealing with diversity. So when diversity erupted on campus and security guards were carding the black students and all kinds of things were happening, feeling alienated, they took over the administration building, the president's office, in 1973. I was there in 68. And everything shut down. ABC News is at the campus. It's alarming because a Quaker college, it looks like racism. What's going on? And people didn't know what to do with it. And the only one they would talk to at that point was me. I happen to be a faculty of color. We all have color. But I was a faculty of color, but mainly because they felt I was sensitive to crossing worlds. And they felt maybe Gangadine could help articulate what they were feeling, alienated in this Quaker community. And that started the whole revolution of diversity at Haverford, which was hitting the entire world, all of America. Each campus was going through this in its own version. But I'm mentioning that because despite the Quakers' great intention and high spirituality, they hadn't developed the ways of coping with diversity. So there are specific challenges in dealing with real diversity. Without realizing, because we're not schooled and educated, most of us, in realizing that we all have a lens. And the lens of the mind is what our culture shapes. And I can have multiple lenses. I could be a civic American where, say, I'm raised in the Judeo-Christian view. I'm a Jew, let us say, and I believe in the Bible and I practice that. That's one lens. That's one me. But I'm also a physicist And I believe in science, and I'm practicing the Big Bang, and I know that that's true. That's a different me, different lens. I'm a civic American. I believe in civic democracy and keeping your religion out of the civic. That's still a different lens, you know. And of course, I'm in therapy, and I'm seeing my therapist to cope with these different worlds. And she's Jungian, and she's teaching me I have a male and a female side that I need to integrate. And I'm now really going crazy for my therapist, you know. And I'm practicing yoga, and I'm chanting. Those are all worlds, and there's different me's. And we don't have the skills of knowing, but how do I put these different selves together? So it's almost a normal schizophrenia. Right? So this is rampant in the culture. We're not educated to become aware of our lens. So if I'm a Christian and I'm trying to interpret yoga and Hindu philosophy, and I'm interpreting from my lens, and I know Jesus is the truth, and I'm a fundamentalist, and I will interpret them through my lens, I'm violating their world. I'm violating their otherness. And the ethos of diversity and otherness requires that you open to respect the other as other. That means I've got to somehow step back from privileging my lens as the only way. And we humans have rational capacities. That's what rationality is. It's a capacity to always step back somewhat from your lens, not see only the world that way, but to open up other possibilities. Right? That's critical thinking. That's the essence of being a human, a rational being. So that's really what it is. We have to realize that when we impose our lens on the other, we violate their otherness, whatever it may be. If I'm a male and I have a male outlook, and my spouse is a woman with a different, and I'm imposing my view on her, I'm violating her otherness as a woman, for example. So it's worldviews, it's human relations, it's personal, and it's the most fundamental skill in being human. Check out your lens, be aware of it, and in your interaction with other people, respect their otherness. And that's ethics. That's the heart of ethics. That's what Jesus is all about. When I was in prison, you visited me. When I was hungry, you fed me. Otherness. Love the other as yourself. And that's all Buddhist ethics too. Compassion. Have compassion for the other. So the ethos of otherness, respecting it, is the heart of dialogue. So dialogue is not a sideshow. Deep dialogue is the essence of rationality. As if we're rational beings, if the essence of a human is a rational being, and we don't know how to dialogue, then we're wanting in the essence of being a human. There's something in the air. And I noted in my 40 years of work, when I was raising these questions back in 1968-70, when I first arrived, saying that the most important question is how do we cross worlds? No one listened. My colleagues didn't understand. And then the crisis of diversity hit the nation, and it was traumatic across the nation. Feminist ways of thinking, African American ways, Asian American, Latino, so many different ways, perspectives. And if we're a multicultural society, we better open up those multiplicities. So the diversity shattered the illusion of unity, of one America, for example, one academic institution, and diversity happened. But the trauma of diversity simply splintered and fractured into many different subcultures and circles that didn't know how to speak to one another. So that was really the situation all around. And so the first stage is, and we face that at Haverford, as a professor of philosophy, trying to help my colleagues understand that real diversity is not just a scattered splintering of separate units, but held together in a space of common ground. And that therefore we need to really have a creative diversity where there can be conversation. And I think there's something in the air now. 30, 40 years later, as we enter the 21st century, we know we're in a global village. And I feel a difference now in the culture. There is a readiness for dialogue. With the post 9/11, that was a global moment, with a clash of cultures, of worldviews, of a high level. The response is, do we bomb the hell out of them? And that's a response. Or do we say, let me try to understand what the Islamic world is, and open up to that? So it was an opportunity on the planet to say, should we not learn to dialogue now? Because our survival turns upon it. If we're going to survive. The Mideast crisis, it's been going on for decades. Peace studies and peacemaking, the art of peace, turns on dialogue, deep dialogue. What's going on in the Middle East chronically, and in so many hotspots around the world, it all traces to egomentalism. That's the term I use. Egomentalism is the dominance of the ego level of thinking and living and forming our world. And global wisdom has been teaching us that we've got to recognize that we're in the ego space and using that mind operating system, and that we have a choice to rehabilitate our mental patterns in the ways of deep dialogue. When we move into deep dialogue, we can reach the common ground across the broken worlds. So 9/11 is a moment is calling for deep dialogue. People don't know how to have a sacred civic space, to open up a space for deep dialogue. So democracy is in crisis. Because if democracy in American form means power to the people, we the people, and we can't be a we because it's a fractured civic space. If the civic space is broken and we can't dialogue, then democracy at its core is at risk. And I would suggest that we haven't had the real American Revolution yet, because to bring across the oceans all of it, immigrants come in with their own ego-mental ways, and to push off the British rule and to get independence is a first stage. But the real American Revolution is to open up the heart and mind to become human, to become dialogue beings. So deep democracy means deep dialogue. And when someone like Martin Luther King said, I've been to the mountaintop, I've seen the other side, I may not get there with you, but one day it's going to come, black man, white man, Gentile and Jew would be together. He was seeing the dialogue community of America yet to happen. It's a strange thing to say that the American Revolution is yet to happen, but this is the time. So yes, I agree with you completely. Something is in the air, and it's a time for the dialogue revolution across this planet. In my 40 years as a philosopher, of course, I started out trained in the European logic, and I hadn't been to India, for example, even though that was my family heritage. And so when I came to Haverford College in '68 with my doctorate and writing my dissertation on the evolution of logic in European from Aristotle to the modern mathematical logic that dominated the 20th century at that time, there was a revolution in mathematical logic which simply displaced the old logic. I looked at both of them and I discovered that they both had great powers. You can't just throw one out or the other, and yet they repelled each other. So there was a split in logic. And I realized if there's a split in logic, and logic is the science of consciousness and reason, then reason is split. And if reason is polarized, it opens up the doors to relativism, anything goes, which is what Socrates got hemlocked for. Because sophistry was that there was no fundamental truth, it was all relative. And Socrates said, no, in my heart I knew there's a basic truth. He didn't know what it was. So now we're facing our modern 21st century version of relativism, or is there any fundamental truth across our different worlds? So my own career, my journey, your question is excellent, was when I went to India in crisis in 1971 for the first time, not thinking I was going to do philosophy. And I went there naively to lecture on my sense of the crisis of logic in the European tradition, which of course in India they wanted to hear, that the Europe was in a crisis. They welcomed that. And I went there to study sitar and tabla, the drums, and to steep myself in the culture. But inadvertently I started studying Indian philosophy at the university and read the Bhagavad Gita for the first time and was stunned at what I discovered. Because if you read the Gita, you see Krishna, the high voice, speaking from Om, speaking to Arjuna, the warrior, in a war with his own family, who's broken down on the battlefield. And it starts out, and then Krishna tries to show him that, Arjuna, you're in the ego mind. That's why you're in this war. Do you realize that? Your life has imploded in a midlife crisis because you are ego-minding. Let me teach you the way of the yoga. And all the yoga ways were to go into meditative consciousness, to enter into the integral holistic space, which I call the dialogue space. Because when you're in the unified field of the yogic mind, and you're in the space of Om, where everything is interconnected, you're experiencing your connectivity with everything else. And so that was a revolution in my life. When I came back to Haverford College in 1972, after 1 year in India, encountering Buddhist philosophy, which was a different version showing when Buddha woke up, he saw that the ego is to suffer. We have a choice. We don't have to do that. We cling to the ego. That's the reason. We are egoholics, so to speak. We're addicted to ego patterns. We have a choice. And if we exercise that choice, we can rehabilitate our minds in the ways of mindfulness. That was Buddha's teaching. Coming back from India after encountering Hindu thought and Buddhist philosophy, it shook my world because no one ever taught me that there's such a thing as ego-minding. I was steeped in that all my life. That's all I knew. So when I came back to Haverford in 1972 with this whole new possibility that could meditative intelligence help us to go into a place, a deeper place, right, that might solve my crisis, that what I discovered in logic, could there be a deeper integral logic? So when I came back to Haverford, I said to my colleagues, I want to start teaching Hindu thought and Buddhist thought. And they allowed me, even though I'm there as a logician, trained in analytic philosophy. And I started to teach Hindu thought and Buddhist thought, but I was getting sick because I was teaching it in the same ego space that I knew, the only thing I knew. And it was not resonating. I knew I was violating the Hindu tradition and the Buddhist tradition, because the essence of those traditions was saying, don't ego, step outside the box, go into the deeper space. So if you're going to go with Krishna and read the text authentically, which is what we want to teach our students, how to authentically read texts and honor them in their own right. And I realized that if I was teaching it in the ego space, I was violating the text. So it really called upon me to pause after 1 or 2 years of failure, feeling this is not working. You're not talking about Buddha or about Krishna. You want to help the students experience this meditative transformation into the deeper space, which is the essence of the text. So I had to redesign teaching from the ground up. And it took me 20, 30 years to do that. That's where I am now. So in my own personal journey, the micro of my own journey, and then seeing that the whole planet needs to understand how to move into this deeper space. Saying you can't objectify the law, you've got to live it. So what became clear to me over decades of work was to pioneer this deeper, what I call global lens, the global mind, the deep space, the missing grammar of logos. I use the word logos, taking the Greek word meaning word, speech, mind, reason, and realizing that Lao Tzu, the Tao of Chinese, and Om of India, and the Shunyata of Buddha, and the Yahweh of the Judaic, and the Christ, and the unified field that Einstein was trying to find and science was trying to tap, we're all trying to get into this deep logos, the unified field, going into this deep space where everything is interconnected. That's where we become human. That's what our teachers were calling us to. But humanity is still caught in this ego-mental space. It dominates us in every way, and it's generating the crises that we face. So the exciting thing and the dangerous thing now in the 21st century is that we're at a tipping point. We can't keep on going. It's unsustainable. After centuries, the ego-mental culture has reached its limit. It's peaking as we speak, so it's getting worse. But the people are ready. As you point out, there's a readiness in the life of the people at the grassroots level. They know there's a deeper way. Science is going into non-locality, the butterfly effect. All of those new concepts are tapping the unified field. So it's a very exciting time. And that's what SEED is about. I hooked up with Glenn about 5 years ago when he called me to give a keynote. And that's what I did. The keynote here in Albequerque was to present the double brackets. And the single brackets says, we need the missing grammar, the deep logos of deep dialogue, in order to have a dialogue here between the indigenous wisdom, with all of its diversity, and the languages of science. In its diversity, there is a common ground, but we have to hold the space of deep dialogue. So SEED is a wonderful venue of a very high order, where the practitioners sitting around this table are year after year deepening the skills of learning the art and the art form of deep dialogue. And it's beginning to happen more and more.
I feel like part of my path is to really establish that those entities that taught my ancestors are still present. They're right here, and they're willing to teach right now. They're willing to teach someone like me who was raised completely in the city, who was raised completely apart from my culture and from native culture in general, and that I can be reached in that way. And to come back into SEED and to hear this going on and to hear that bridging, that real commitment, sincere commitment to bridging and understanding between the peoples who have access to these teachers and culture and traditions, and the people who feel like they have lost it, really resonated with me. And I feel like my life is really committed to that. And so if we walk and we pray and we listen, we're going to come upon the inspiration for those same sounds, for those same ways, and those spirits to come and talk through us so that we have our language. And so I think Seed really makes that effort. And the collection of people that come to the dialogue is just phenomenal. And when that spirit of intention, of true understanding, and coming into group mind from all different walks of life comes into the same room, there's nothing better in the world for me than to be a part of that experience, because I think that's the critical point right now.